Picture yourself in an olive grove near Athens, around 427 BCE, where a boy with the name Aristocles, later called Plato, walked slowly among low trunks and late afternoon light, and first felt certain questions settle into him like small stones into a soft pocket. Imagine the breeze carrying the faint voices of the city, the distant clatter of sandals on sun-warmed stone, and the hush of families within narrow courtyards. In that slow geography, in a house tied to an old Athenian line, a life began that would move gently toward asking why the common things felt as they did. Let your breathing match the rhythm of that grove, even as we let the details arrive quietly, one by one. Plato was born into a family of some standing, the son of Ariston and Pariction, and that standing gave a certain order to daily life. He learned the soft rules of household ritual, the way bread was lifted at dawn, the way lamp oil was measured, and these small practices folded into him like pages into a book. Let us move ever so slowly to the image of a schoolyard, where boys practiced music and gymnastics, where lyres were plucked in even, repeating patterns and running feet made gentle rhythms on packed earth. These were standard lessons for a young Athenian of his class, but in the midst of such training there also grew a quieter habit, the habit of noticing the difference between the practiced form of a thing and the way it was in his mind. Gently turning our attention to the larger city, we notice that Plato's childhood unfolded while the Peloponnesian War, which began in 431 BCE, shaped civic life and left its slow marks on households and markets. In those years of civic strain, questions about justice, courage, and the good life moved from public debates into private reflection, and a young listener encountered teachers and thinkers who asked him to name what he truly meant. Now, with a quieter step, we consider the figure who would come to matter most to that young listener, Socrates, whose way of asking questions, soft, persistent, and precise, served like a small, steady current that pulled at Plato's attention. Let that thought rest as we imagine Plato, perhaps in his teens, hearing a conversation that left a shape in his mind, a shape that would slowly become the pattern of his later thinking. Permit one more calm observation before we close this gentle scene. The man we call Plato carried these small, domestic beginnings into a life of question and writing, and the questions first planted among olive trees, and in the rhythm of household tasks, never quite left him. They gathered, soft and persistent, like dust on a shelf, and later gave form to dialogues that still invite us to set down our daily hurry and examine what is most lasting. So let that image remain, the boy in the grove, the sound of a lyre, the hush of a courtyard, and let it settle as the mind eases, ready in time, to follow him more closely into the city and into the questions that follow. Tonight, we explore the most ordinary turning point that kept Plato awake, The moment one lyrical habit was replaced by another, more patient one. Picture, for a long, gentle moment, a narrow lamp on a wooden table in Athens, the year not long after 399 before the Common Era, when the air still remembered the trial of Socrates. Allow your attention to rest on that lamp, on the soft circle of light, and on the slow exchange from hymn to question, from song to inquiry. In such light, a young man born in 427, before the Common Era, began to reweigh the poems he had learned by heart, and to listen, quietly, to the voice of a friend who would not take easy answers. Let us move ever so slowly to the first cause we name, Socrates and his calm, insistent questioning. Socrates did not write his lessons down. He walked and he asked, and his method was to draw out what his interlocutor most confidently held, and then to wait gently as certainty softened into doubt. When Socrates was condemned, and in 399 BCE executed by the city he loved, that quiet way of questioning did not vanish. Rather, it entered the inward life of those who had listened, including Plato, who began to think that the conversation itself might be a new kind of poem, one composed of questions and careful replies. Let that settle as an image, a conversation becoming an architecture, a lyric turned into a ladder for thought. Now, with a quieter step, we consider travel and loss, and how they shape a mind that turns inward. In the years after Socrates' death, Plato is said to have spent time beyond Athens, moving through southern Italy and Sicily, and perhaps seeing the old schools of the Egyptian shore, each place leaving a soft imprint like a pressed leaf in a book. Those journeys brought him into contact with different ways of ordering the world, mathematical harmonies, Pythagorean rhythms, practical politics, and each encounter taught him to measure the ordinary against something steadier and more enduring. This patient comparison would eventually feed the idea that everyday things participate in timeless, perfect patterns, what we will later call forms. Permit one more calm observation. From travel and from the memory of loss, an inward life is shaped, a life that prefers slow sentences to swift declamations, and which reads a single idea as carefully as one might read a letter by lamplight. Gently turning our attention to a small, quiet beginning, the founding of a place of learning, helps us close this part of our evening. Around the year 387 BCE, Plato returned to Athens and opened what came to be called the Academy, in a grove dedicated to the hero Academus, a literal door left ajar in the hush of trees where students would come to sit, to speak, and to learn the slow art of thinking together. Imagine that grove now, leaves stirred by a patient wind, students settling into the same calm posture as the lamp on the table. I invite you to let the sound of those imagined voices sink into the background of your breath. In a single, steady phrase, poetry loosened its hold, and a quieter habit of questioning took its place. The academy was the gentle doorway through which that habit would pass, and in that quiet doorway Plato began, at last, to trace the map that would lead us to the forms. In Athens, in a grove by the academy founded around 387 BCE, a philosopher named Plato, who lived roughly from 427 to 347 BCE, spoke of a quiet contradiction in the world we think we know. What seems solid and familiar, the painted cup, the carved chair, the roundness we trace with our finger, all of these, he suggested, point towards something quieter and more permanent that does not itself change. Let that proposition settle as a soft fact. There may be stable, perfect patterns behind the changing things of our daily experience. In a gentle voice, we begin by naming those patterns, forms, or ideas, as Plato often does in dialogues like the Republic and the Phaedo, where he invites us to look beyond appearances and into what endures. Permit this first image to rest in your mind like a slow, steady breath. Gently turning our attention to a simple example, imagine a painted circle on a child's drawing. The painted circle is warm with blotches of color, slightly wobbly at the edge, and familiar in its imperfection. Now imagine, without haste, the perfect circle that mathematicians conceive, a geometric shape defined by a single unvarying center and a constant radius in every direction. The painted circle participates in, or imitates, the perfect circle, but it never quite becomes it. It is a kind of shadow or echo of something more exact. This relationship is not meant to alarm, only to soothe, to show that behind messy particulars there is an order we can recognize and quietly rest with. Let us move ever so slowly to the thought that knowledge itself leans on these stable patterns, since to know a thing is, in Plato's gentle account, to grasp the form it resembles. Now, with a quieter step, we consider the problem of universals as a gently posed puzzle, rather than a heated contest. When you say beauty or justice or circle, do you mean a solitary example you can touch, or a pattern that many things share? Plato preferred to say that such words point to forms, beauty itself, justice itself, the circle itself, that which makes many particular things recognizable as beautiful, just, or round. In the Republic, particularly in Book 6 and 7, he asks us to imagine an ascent from dim shadows into a clearer light, culminating in the form of the good, which casts intelligibility and value upon the rest. Think of it like the sun for the eye of the soul, not in bright clamor, but as a soft radiance that allows things to be known. We also hear, in quieter margins, the careful skepticism of later thinkers, like Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BCE, and would raise questions about how forms relate to particulars. Yet even that scrutiny can be received as a slow, clarifying breeze that cools and refines the original thought. Allow these tensions to breathe in you without urgency. Permit one more calm observation as we close this part. The theory of forms is not a distant abstraction meant to estrange us from daily life, but a soft lens that explains how change and knowledge are possible together. The painted circle and the perfect circle, the flicker of a candle and the idea of light, the many acts of justice and the notion of justice itself. Each pair invites us to rest in a quieter understanding that undergirds what we see. Gently turning our attention to that quieter realm helps the restless mind settle, because it offers pattern where there was mere bustle, and meaning where there was only noise. Let that thought remain like a slow tide, drawing out the day's small disturbances, and so we close this reflection with the calm recognition that behind familiar things, there may lie an unchanging harmony we can quietly imagine, and tonight, begin to trust. The simple truth about knowledge takes exactly 4 quiet steps to understand, each one slower and more consoling than the last, spoken now as if in a cool garden at the Academy near the year 387 before the Common Era, where Plato walked slowly among olive trees and taught with a steady voice. And so we begin with the first, gentle sentence of a long, slow explanation. Picture for a moment a straight line lying very still on a table before you, divided not by abrupt breaks, but by soft, even marks. And know that this simple line is also a ladder, and that each rung is a way of seeing and of knowing. Let us move ever so slowly to imagine that the left half of the line belongs to the world of visible things, things that can be touched and measured, and that the right half belongs to the intelligible world, which is quieter, more steady, and more lasting. In that quiet division we will find our 4 steps, each a calmer way of being awake to truth. Now, with a quieter step, we consider the lower 2 rungs, which Plato called, in a soft and careful way, the realm of opinion or doxa, and which we can feel as the place of images and of ordinary objects. The very first rung, the faintest and most shadowed, is like watching silhouettes cast on a wall, or seeing ripples on a pond at dusk. And Plato names this state eikasia, often translated as imagination or simple conjecture. The second rung rises a bit higher, though it is still in the visible half, and here we encounter actual physical things, chairs, trees, and faces, which we can touch and point to. And Plato calls this pistis, commonly rendered as belief. Together, these 2 rungs, the shadow and the object, form the sphere of doxa, opinion, which is useful and familiar yet quiet in its uncertainty, like a river whose surface reveals its motion, but not the full depth beneath. Let that thought rest as you trace the lines slowly in your mind, following the gentle slope from shadow to object. Gently turning our attention to the right half of the line, we find the realm Plato names the intelligible, where opinion gives way to true knowing, or episteme, and where the light is steadier and more constant. The third rung is where mathematical thinking lives, a place of hypotheses and diagrams, where we use distinct steps of thought to ascend from particular examples to general relations. And the motion here is called dhyana, deliberative thought, a careful walking up a stair of reasons. Above that, at the highest, calmest rung, is gnosis, direct intellectual insight into the forms themselves, the timeless patterns that make things what they are. This final step is what Plato means by episteme in its fullest sense, knowledge that does not merely point to the idea of justice or beauty, but sees their pure, unmoving presence. And here we find a kind of understanding that grounds certainty like a deep, slow breath grounds the body. Permit one more calm observation as we let the diagram settle like a stone placed at the bottom of a quiet pond. And notice how each of the 4 steps is nearer or farther from light, nearer or farther from permanence, and how each asks less of rush and more of patience. The lower steps are companions to everyday life, useful and soft, and the higher steps are rarer and cooler, inviting a different kind of attention. If you imagine tracing the line again, slowly, you will feel that knowledge is not a race but a measured ascent, a long calm breath in 4 parts: image, object, reason, and insight. And as you exhale, allow the thought that knowing can be a slow, consoling journey to rest comfortably inside you. So we close this part with a quiet promise that the path to truth may be walked gently, step by patient step, and that in the silence between each step, understanding grows like moss in the shade, steady and soft. In ancient Athens, around 380 years before the Common Era, imagine watching paint dry on a wall made of shadows. Now imagine something even slower, a soul gradually noticing the light beyond the cave. Picture very gently a hollowed cavern, low and long, where a small number of prisoners have sat since childhood. Their legs and necks are gently bound, turned toward a blank wall, and all they can see are silhouettes cast by a fire burning far behind them. This is the scene that Plato, speaking through Socrates in Book 7 of the Republic, sets before Glaucon. The shapes pass slowly on a raised walkway behind the prisoners, figures of animals, of human figures, of objects moved by unseen hands. The prisoners know those silhouettes as their whole world. Let that image rest a moment, like a slow pulse, as the shapes mark time on a shadowed wall. Now, with a quieter step, we consider what happens when one prisoner is released. At first his eyes ache. The light from the fire is harsh and unfamiliar. He turns his head and sees the objects themselves for the first time, not merely their silhouettes. He is led slowly up a rough slope, through a narrow mouth of the cave and into the open air. The daylight is blinding at first. In Plato's metaphor, that daylight culminates in the sight of the sun itself, which he asks us to understand as an image of the form of the good, the source by which things are known and by which they are what they are. The journey from shadow to sun mirrors a movement from opinion, which Plato calls doxa, to knowledge, episteme. It marks a slow, patient ascent of the mind toward clearer seeing. Gently turning our attention to the return, we notice a different tenderness. The freed man, now adjusted to the brightness, goes back down into the cave to sit with those who remained, to tell them of what he has seen. But his words move like strange light in that shadowed room. The prisoners cannot make sense of brilliance they have never felt. They imagine him mad, and the soft work of persuasion is often met with laughter, or with a refusal so steady it becomes a kind of care. In the Republic, Plato moves from this story to a quiet argument about the role of the philosopher, not as a judge of others, but as one who has slowly learned to see and with patience can help others notice their own unseen bindings. Permit one more calm observation. The cave is not a simple condemnation of ordinary life, but a patient map of perception, showing stages by which a person might move from mere appearance to understanding. Let us move ever so slowly to a brief, soothing summary. The shadows are the world of sense. The objects behind the fire are the more real things that cast those shadows, and the sun is the form of the good, the principle that allows truth and being to appear. The allegory invites no urgent accusation. It offers a measured invitation to notice, gently, that our ordinary certainties may be partial. Allow that thought to float, as if on a pond, and let a faint relief come as you imagine the pace of learning patient, gradual, and kind. And now, with a quieter breath, rest with the picture of the cave as a map, not a trap, and let your attention soften as we prepare to walk slowly toward the next quiet idea. 3 was the precise number that shaped Plato's idea of the soul. Reason, spirit, appetite, each part settling into a slow balance, like 3 hands on a simple clock, moving with quiet agreement. In the Republic, written roughly around 380 BCE, Plato describes this gentle architecture of the inner life, and he does so in a tone that invites slow attention rather than hurried judgment. Let us move ever so slowly to place each part, one after another, on the table of our minds, so they may be seen and soothed. First, we notice the rational part, often called logistikon, the thoughtful watcher that measures and understands. Then the spirited part, thumos, the quiet warmth that feels indignation and protects what is dear. And finally appetite, epithumia, the many simple longings that ask for food, rest, and small comforts. Permit these names to sit in your thoughts like smooth stones beside a calm stream, each distinct, each slow, each brought into view without rush. Now, with a quieter step, we consider how Plato links these parts to virtues that harmonize them, virtues that are less like rules and more like the habits of a well-ordered room. Wisdom, or Sophia, is the guiding light of reason, the steady lamp that helps choose what to pursue and what to set down. Courage, or Andrea, is the calm persistence of spirit when faced with discomfort. Temperance, or Sophrosine, is the slow practice of appetite learning to wait, to take what is needed and no more. Finally, justice, dikaiosine, appears not as a loud proclamation, but as a tranquil balance, the quiet state that arises when each part takes its proper role and no part overwhelms another. In Book IV of the Republic, Plato invites us to imagine the city and the soul together, a gentle mirror where the harmony of communities reflects the harmony within each person, and vice versa. Gently turning our attention to the everyday, we find soft domestic examples that make these ideas feel attainable and restful. Measured temperance may look like leaving a cup of tea to cool until it is pleasantly warm, savoring one sip and pausing before the next. Steady courage might be the small breath you take before answering with honesty, or the slow hand that steadies a child crossing a street. Thoughtful wisdom can be folding a letter before sending it, weighing each word like a leaf placed with care in a book. Imagine the soul as a simple garden. Reason tends the paths, spirit waters the young shoots with courage. Appetite is the hungry deer who must be gently fed a single ear of corn, so the rest of the garden may flourish. Let that image rest, like soft light on a window pane, as we notice how inner order brings a quiet flourishing that asks for no applause. Permit one more calm observation. That virtue, for Plato, is not a distant ideal but a daily arrangement, a slow tuning of the self so each part may play its note without discord. When reason guides, spirit protects, and appetite is held with temperance, justice blooms as serene harmony, and the good life appears not as a prize to seize, but as a room kept in gentle order. Let the thought of this soft interior balance settle into your breathing, a small assurance that order is both possible and peaceful. So rest now in the image of 3 slow hands on that quiet clock, moving together, marking time in an even, untroubled way, preparing us for the next quiet part of our journey. Hidden in the most boring details of city planning, who teaches, who builds, who listens, lies Plato's quiet test of justice, written in Athens, around 380 BCE, and offered as a slow, careful blueprint for communal life. Imagine a city not as a battlefield of speeches and slogans, but as a long, low room where careful choices are made about children, meals, streets, and stories. Plato, who lived roughly between 428 and 348 BCE, called this city a Callipolis, a beautiful city, and he set it down in a dialogue we now know as the Politeia, or the Republic. Hear now how this ideal is less a dramatic manifesto and more a collection of quiet arrangements, a map of responsibilities, a timetable for education, a modest set of rules about what stays private and what is shared. Let us move ever so slowly to the first particular of that map, and notice how the city's design mirrors the soul within each of us. Gently turning our attention to roles and rhythm, we find three harmonious parts, like three lanes of a calm river: the producers who make our bread and cloth, the guardians who keep watch and care, and the rulers who hold knowledge of the good. Plato compares these classes to the tripartite soul, reason, spirit, appetite, suggesting that justice is simply each part doing its quiet work, without crowding the others. He imagines education as the slow shaping of character, beginning in childhood with music and movement, continuing with numbers and geometry, and maturing into dialectic, a long course that prepares a few to see the form of the good. In Book III, he speaks of poetry and story, advising restraint so that the city's songs steady the heart, and in later books he sketches a guarded community life for the guardians, with shared meals and guarded property, designed to prevent the sharp edges of rivalry. Permit one more calm observation. Plato even proposes, gently, a noble lie, a story told for harmony, a way to temper anxiety about status and to keep the city breathing evenly. Now, with a quieter step, we consider the philosopher king, not as a thunderous monarch, but as a soft steward of wisdom, trained by years of study and reflection, returning to guide the city with a steady hand. In books V through VII, Plato describes a long course of education: arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and finally dialectic, that prepares a few souls to turn from the shifting shadows of opinion toward the light of the forms, especially the form of the good. Imagine a teacher who, having spent decades in slow study, chooses curriculum not to win applause, but to cultivate honest curiosity. Imagine a ruler who speaks measured sentences and offers counsel like a warm blanket. In the gentle allegory of the cave, the philosopher's ascent is quiet and deliberate, and the return to the city is an act of patient service rather than theatrical proclamation. Let that idea settle like a soft stone in a pond, as we breathe and consider how justice might look in small, ordinary places. And so, in small vignettes, justice appears as a set of habitual kindnesses, a school where teachers keep promises and choose stories that calm and instruct, a workshop where builders measure twice and speak truthfully about cost and care, a neighborhood council that listens to a complaint and attends to it with patience. Picture a baker who, each morning, thinks of the city as a whole and chooses bread that nourishes, not merely profit that crowds the next day's sleep. Picture a guardian who patrols not with harshness, but with the quiet aim of keeping children safe and gardens tended. These are small acts, repeated, that form justice as habit, like a slow communal breath. In this calming architecture of life, the philosopher king's role is to preserve the conditions in which such habits can grow, to shape education, to hold law gently, to encourage songs that steady the heart. And when the city's parts perform their measured roles, each within its modest bounds, justice arrives not as a triumphal headline, but as a steady hum, like well-tuned strings vibrating together. Let this thought rest, that Plato's ideal city asks us, softly, to bring wisdom into ordinary choices, and to let justice be the patient pattern of daily care. Picture a dim library where Plato's dialogues rest on a shelf, unchanged across centuries, their words settling like soft dust that still catches the light. Imagine the slow turning of pages that are measured not by urgency, but by the steady rhythm of thought. Plato lived in Athens across the 5th and 4th centuries before the Common Era, born about 427 years before this era ended, and passing away around 347. He founded a place of study we call the Academy around 387 before the Common Era, a quiet garden of conversation where the idea that there might be everlasting, perfect forms could be entertained as a hypothesis for life. Let us sit with that image for a moment, as if the room itself were breathing slowly with us. The forms in Plato's gentle telling are like distant stars, timeless, steady sources of light that help us navigate the softer, flickering world of shadows and objects nearer to hand. And so we begin with a single calm observation that Plato's question was not merely about things, but about stability, about what endures when the day becomes night. Let that thought rest like a warm stone in the palm of your mind, and allow the next quiet step to come. Now, with a quieter step, we consider how that quiet idea spread, not with the clatter of immediate change, but with the patient passing of names and interpreters. A movement we call Neoplatonism rose many centuries later, led by a thinker named Plotinus, writing around the 3rd century of the Common Era, who wove Plato's thinking into a more unified metaphysical fabric. Plotinus spoke of a one of emanations, of a hierarchy of reality, and those images offered a way for later minds to hold Plato's forms alongside spiritual, theological concerns. Over time, the soft echo of Plato reached Augustine, born in 354 of the Common Era, whose own interior journey toward Christian faith was shaped, gently and subtly, by the Neoplatonic vocabulary of reality that he encountered. In the slow arc of the Middle Ages, fragments of Platonic thought flowed across languages and lands, reaching translators, mystics, and scholars who preserved the sense that some principles lie beyond mere appearance. Permit one more calm observation. The Renaissance, in the 15th century, brought another hush of rediscovery, when Marsilio Ficino translated Plato into Latin for the Medici circle in Florence, letting the old dialogue sit again in the hands of poets, painters, and patrons. You might recall a familiar painting from the early 16th century, called the School of Athens, completed between 1509 and 1511, where a figure representing Plato points upward, as if indicating the place of those steady forms. Gently turning our attention to these moments, we trace a careful thread. Ideas carried, rendered, and re-rendered, each time settling a little differently, as if leaving concentric circles on a slow-moving pond. Let us move ever so slowly to how those circles reached other disciplines, how Plato's quiet questions slipped into art, into the life of science, and into moral thought. In art, the search for ideal beauty became a practical meditation. Sculptors and painters aimed not merely to copy what they saw, but to suggest something more constant beneath the surface, an ideal proportion, a harmony that endures beyond the passing fashions of an hour. In the sciences and in mathematics, a different kind of echo appears, where some thinkers began to treat numbers, geometrical figures, and mathematical structures as if they were discoveries of a realm that does not depend upon our sensory whims. In the 20th century, the logician Kurt Gödel, who lived from 1906 until 1978, offered arguments that many have taken as sympathetic to a Platonic view of mathematics, suggesting that mathematical truths exist independently of us, and that we come to perceive them rather than invent them. And so we see Plato's calm question returning in a modern register. What, if anything, grounds the certainty of our knowledge? Where do the standards we use to judge truth and beauty come from? What, if not mere sensation, anchors our claims about reality? In ethics, too, the persistence of ideals is felt as a kind of quiet companionship. Some moral philosophers speak as if justice or goodness have a standing that outlasts particular customs, and that thought can be traced back, like a river's tributary, to the older conversation about forms. Let that settle. The idea need not be defended here, only observed, like the slow shifting of light across a quiet room. Permit one more calm observation before we close this part. Plato's influence is not a loud proclamation, but a long, slow ripple that shapes how later minds ask questions about permanence and ideality, about whether the bedrock of things is accessible to reason, to beauty, or to some deeper intuition. Whether in a chapel where theologians struggled to name God, in a workshop where artists chased proportion, or in a laboratory where scientists look for unchanging laws, Plato's shadow is not a shape that dominates, but a soft presence that suggests possibilities. And so, in this quiet hour, we can imagine those ripples circling outward still, meeting the shores of our own daily thinking, inviting us to slow our questions, and perhaps to sleep with them, gentle and unfinished, at the edge of awareness. Let that thought rest, and let the silence that follows be like the soft closing of a book. The simple truth about wisdom takes exactly 10 slow breaths to accept. Inhale, exhale. In this quiet closing, we do not hurry the answer. We let it arrive like a gentle tide, carrying the main currents of Plato's thought toward the shore where you can rest beside them. Imagine the year 387 before the Common Era, when Plato is said to have founded his academy in a grove near Athens, and imagine, alongside that date, a single perfect circle, a shape without wobble, untouched by the measuring tools of the marketplace. Allow the image of that circle to sit in the center of your attention, soft at the edges, steady at the heart, as we gather the day's ideas, reality, knowledge, virtue, society, and beauty, one at a time, and then gently fold them together like a simple cloth. Let each idea be uncomplicated, and let each sentence be even, as if your breath and my words move at the same slow pace. First, reality and knowledge, as companions who walk in the same slow light. Plato taught, in works such as the Republic and the Phaedo, that beyond the changing things of the world there are timeless forms, perfect patterns that ordinary objects imperfectly imitate. Picture, for a moment, a wooden wheel and the idea of the circle that it only approximates, the form of circularity that is exact and unchanging, and therefore knowable. Knowledge in this quiet view is less like chasing a fickle moth and more like turning a lantern slowly toward a fixed star. As you steady the lamp, the light reveals the same contours again and again, and that steadiness soothes the mind. Let that thought rest as we move, with a quieter step, to the ordering of the soul. Second, consider virtue and the soul's gentle ordering, a chamber in which harmony is the most restful arrangement. Plato likened the city to the soul, proposing that justice and wisdom arise when each part attends to its proper work. Imagine the calm pattern of a house in which every room is at ease with its purpose. In the Republic, he sketches the notion of a ruler trained in philosophy, the philosopher king, not as a figure of domination, but as a steady gardener who prunes and waters the polis with an eye for the good. Beauty, too, in this context, is not mere ornament, but the simple ordering that makes the household of the soul feel right. Beauty soothes because it aligns parts into a gentle whole. Permit one more calm observation. Truth pursued slowly becomes a lullaby, a lifelong practice that eases rather than agitates, and it is this steady seeking that invites sleep rather than resistance. In a softer light, we notice how these themes fold into one another, like quiet hands laying down a blanket. Reality gives the anchor, knowledge supplies the map, virtue arranges the crew, society offers the shared vessel, and beauty keeps the motion gentle. Now, with a quieter step, we consider a single consoling question to hold as the sound of words diminishes. Imagine the perfect form of a circle resting in the palm of your attention. How calmly does it turn? If you would like, breathe with me 10 slow breaths now, counting each as if naming a soft star. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. With each inhale, receive a thought. With each exhale, let the thought drift further away until nothing remains but a pleasant absence. Let that absence be enough, and let the mind settle like water in a deep bowl, still and reflective, ready for sleep or for the gentle silence that follows.